not like they won that game at Arrowhead. They went to Foxborough and took care of business. How impressed were you with the Chiefs last night?
Highly impressed. But it says as much. Well, think about what they did. They didn't just beat the Patriots. They kept Tom Brady from throwing a touchdown. They shut Rob Gronkowski almost completely out. Yeah, Cooks had 88 yards in receptions, and he did okay, but he sure wasn't the over-the-top threat that they thought he was going to be. So they did a lot to stop the Patriots, and that's the noisiest crowd ever, and the most points ever scored against the Belichick team in the Belichick era. So if the Chiefs can have that kind of offense or something close to that all year long, they're a Super Bowl contender.
What would make you think that they can keep that offense? Because when I watched them last night, one thing I noticed is they got some speed. Yeah,
Hill with Hill and with the Hunt, they definitely have. Because that's the thing, they've been more of a power offense in the past, and now they're that type of offense. You think about it too, they didn't get much out of Kelsey last night. So if you've got Hill, if he can give them enough, that's the thing. Think back to when Andy Reid was in Philadelphia. And he'd have receivers. Sometimes he'd have receivers who may only see 100 targets all year long, which is not a big number. It's solid, but 160, 170 will lead the league. So 100 is like an average number, maybe below average. But those receivers would do really well on those passes, especially in vertical passes. I think Hill can do that for them. We know Kelsey can be that type of tight end. They've got Hunt. They've got guys behind Hunt too. So it's not like Charkandrick West scored a touchdown last night. So they've got options outside of the guys they were leaning on last night. Just a matter of can Alex Smith do what he did. Although, again, I'll caveat that by saying the Patriots made a number of coverage errors last night. They left some people wide open. And the same thing, and Chiefs did the same thing. But I think you're going to see that in Week 1, but you probably won't see that in Week 8 or 9. So, again, I'll be curious to see how the Chiefs adjust to that. But they've got some margin for error now.
Hey, KC, it's Pete Thompson. People are saying today that the Patriots look old and slow. I mean, they've lost games like this in the past, but are you concerned about them this time?
The concern, if I had any, is last year they threw the fewest vertical passes. Tom Brady threw, even if you prorate for him and for the team, they threw the fewest vertical passes that they've thrown since, I believe it was 2009. It's been like 7-8 years that they threw that few vertical passes. Last night it looked like, at times, that they said, we're going to go vertical no matter what. And that's not been the way they've approached things normally. And I think they said, we're going to do this no matter what, we're going to throw it. And mind you, people talk about Tom Brady not being a good vertical passer. He was third in the league last year in vertical yards per attempt. So he has the vertical chops, but you can't force it if it's not there. If they're putting people over the top, they're playing too deep, and you're trying to run certain routes against that, you're just not going to get people open. So I have a feeling the Patriots are going to go back and say, hey, let's throw the deep ball when it's there, and if we can incorporate it into our offense more down the road, that's great. But we can't try and keep forcing this thing, or else we're going to have the same problems on Thursday night.
All right, that was the Thursday night game. Chiefs go into Foxborough to win. Let's look at the Eagles and the Redskins on Sunday, KC. And, this is an interesting one because the Eagles' secondary is certainly not their strong suit. They are smallish in the secondary. They don't really have that big physical corner that you see around the league anymore. They brought Darby in. That should help them out there. But Darby and Mills against Terrell Pryor and Doxson and Jamison Crowder, what do you think about that matchup for Philadelphia?
It's not a good matchup. The problem for Philadelphia also is that I did an article for ESPN's Insider section this week, and it's really based on fantasy football, but it applies as well to standard football. And it looked at the strength of offensive lines versus defensive front sevens, and to see how well those match up against each other. Because when you look at production of players both in the fantasy and the standard perspective, if you've got a good advantage in the offensive line, your running backs will run for a whole lot more yards, 4 to 5 times as many yards, and your passing game will be about 60% more productive. So Philadelphia's got secondary issues, but here's the thing. I graded everybody's front seven and offensive line on an A to F scale this week, and there's a big formula behind it, but the nutshell is Washington has a B+ on offense, which sounds great. It's like, hey, that means they got a good offensive line. Philadelphia's front seven I've got rated as a B+. So the same thing. So they can match up toe-to-toe there against Washington and take some of that advantage away. So they might be able to say, hey, we can get some pressure on Cousins, or at least we can get in a stalemate against that offensive line and take some of the pressure off for our secondary. So don't like the matchups in the secondary, but like the front seven and what it can do against Washington's offense.
Well, that's a good point. The Eagles went out and got Derek Barnett. Brandon Graham is rated as one of the top defensive ends in football. And obviously Chris Long they brought in. They're hoping to get Vinny Curry. Tim Jernigan, very underrated pass rushing from the middle. Cox can be one of the best in the game. This is a pretty good Redskins offensive line, though. So who wins that battle up front?
I think, like I said, I think there's going to be wins on both sides. I've got that rated. I rate the overall the relative rating of matchup of the matchup. So if you're like if it's a B versus a B, it's an okay matchup. Put it this way: I've got Philadelphia's front seven matching up against the Washington offensive line. I've got it as a C- overall matchup. So I think it doesn't do very well for Philadelphia. But I'll flip it over for just a second. If you look at Philadelphia's offensive line versus the Washington front seven, Philadelphia ranks. They've got a B+ rating. Washington has a C+ rating. So Philadelphia has a top 6 rating in front line in our offensive line versus front seven for this week. So what that means is that I think that Philadelphia's offense can can get some of the pressure. I think Philadelphia's offense is going to be able to get ahead of the curve, and maybe that's going to make Washington be a little more one-dimensional than they want to be.
We'll jump to the Eagles offense in a minute, but first, we know a big factor for Washington is Jordan Reed. Do the Eagles have the personnel to defend him? I know, Bradham and Hicks, pretty good guys, but do you like that matchup, or is that an area where Washington can really exploit?
I don't like the matchup, but here's the thing. Washington loses Deshaun Jackson. Deshaun Jackson last year ranked 3rd in the league in vertical yards per attempt. So Deshaun Jackson was a great vertical receiver. They brought in Pryor, and they think Pryor's going to be just as good. But you look at Pryor's numbers, and even taking into account that, it was the Cleveland offense, you start looking at his vertical yards per attempt and stretch vertical yards per attempt, how well he's doing on passes. They're throwing really far downfield. He didn't rate so well last year. And remember, that was his first full year playing receiver, so this is only his second full year playing receiver. What I think that does is he's got some limitations in his game to where Philadelphia's not going to have to pay the same amount of attention to him as they did to Deshaun Jackson, and I think it's going to allow them to pay more attention to Reed. The wild card there, though, Jamison Crowder. Crowder had much better numbers than people think. And I don't know if he can continue that production if he gets up to 150 targets, and maybe he's a 100-target guy as well. But he's a guy, I think they're going to have to worry more about Crowder than they are Terrell Pryor. But if they can hold either of those guys in check, I think they're going to pay more attention to Reed this year than they have in past years.
Casey, I'm so glad you brought up Crowder because it's clear that he's given the Eagles a lot of issues in the past. And if they have Malcolm Jenkins in there, a lot of Patrick Robinson, is that an issue in the slot?
It is an issue because actually Crowder can also. I was talking to some people this offseason about Crowder and his fantasy prospects, and somebody was talking to the Washington staff, and the Washington staff said, "Look, we think we could do anything with Crowder. We don't think not just we can throw in the slot or we can throw short passes. If we want to go vertical, we can go vertical. We'll move in the outside, It's like he can do anything in our offense that we ask him to do, and that's a great skill to have. But again, it's a matter of what do they want him to do. If they put him in the slot, I think that's good for the Eagles actually, because then that's where he's going to be. And if they start moving around and such, and say you're going to have him do a bunch of different things, that could actually cause more of an issue. So I'm Philadelphia. I'm probably, even though he's dangerous in the slot, I'd rather see him there than have him be a wild card all over the field.
Talking with KC Joyner, ESPN.com, NFL Insider here. The matchups to watch, that's on the defensive side of the ball. When you're Philly now, if you're Doug Peterson putting a game plan together against this Washington defense, what should Doug Peterson be looking to do?
Run the ball. I like the idea of Carson Wentz with new receivers, and he can go vertical and things, but I want to counterpunch with that stuff. And when Philadelphia's got one of the best offensive lines in the league. Again, they're ranked 6th this week. You're looking at that type of offensive line, and you're going up against the front seven in Washington. Washington's front seven is they're below average. I mean, they're not. This is not a very good front seven, and I like that matchup so much that if I'm Peterson, I'm saying I want to run the ball as often as possible. I want to lean. And in fact, funny thing is that I think I mentioned this one of the last times we talked. That B+ grade I gave Philadelphia, that doesn't even account for the fact that Lane Johnson could be counted as a starter. Now, if you count him as a starter, that grade actually moves up into the A range. But according to my system, because he only played 6 games last year, he was technically a backup because he only played 6 games. So, so in essence, you could be talking about an A- offense versus a C+ front seven. I love that matchup, and if I'm them, I'm just want to run power football, and then when Washington comes up to stop that, just let Wentz cut it loose, because if Wentz can do what he did early last year, some of the things that he did, and he was doing those on a lot of dink and dunk passes, but I'd like to send a message early if I'm Philadelphia that I'm willing to go over the top of Wentz and say maybe hit some passes to Torrey Smith that's only 2 years removed from being number 2 in the league in vertical yards per attempt.
Yeah, Smith, a newcomer, had that big play in the game against the Dolphins in the third preseason game. And then there's Alshon Jeffrey. How about the Jeffrey possible matchup with Josh Norman in the secondary?
Norman he's got a lot of publicity, and he gets a lot of play, and he does make some plays and such. I just don't think, when I'm looking at his metrics, I don't see him rating out as well as everybody thinks that he does. I actually have him rated as, I've got that rating system I talk about frequently where red is a tough matchup, you want to avoid it, yellow is an okay matchup, or green is a favorable matchup. Josh Norman actually rates as a yellow-rated quarterback. It's not that he's good and he can do some things and he can be a ball hawk, but he's not a shutdown guy. He can play very consistently over the course of a season, but his metrics are usually good, very good, but not great. So if I'm them, I don't necessarily want to go to that matchup, but I want to go to it often enough to let Washington know you're going to have to think about whoever Norman's covering. You can't just say we got him on an island and we don't worry about that guy. I want to throw there enough times to let them fear him. But wherever Norman goes, that's fine. I'll go to Torrey Smith and go vertical over the top and say, Norman, maybe you should be covering Torrey Smith instead of Alshon.
KC, a lot of people here keep talking about Zach Ertz having a big year. Is this a game that he can have one against the Redskins defense?
Remember, they're playing a backup strong safety. Cravens, he stepped away. He's no longer with the team, so they've got according to their depth chart, DeShazer Everett is going to be their strong safety. And no disrespect to Everett, but Washington wasn't very good before he got in there. So it's possible he turns into a step up, but I think that's a green-rated matchup for Philadelphia, and I think they should be trying to exploit that one as often as possible. In fact, if I'm them, the two matchups I'm looking for in the secondary, I got Kendall Fuller rated as a green-rated quarterback, and I got DeShazer Everett as a green-rated strong safety. I'm going to those matchups. Again, I don't want to center the whole offense around them, but I want to go to those matchups often enough to let Washington know we'll go to any of our receivers across the field and make you guys cover the entire field. Because if they do that, again, I could see Jeffrey getting an over-the-top pass or getting Smith open deep.
KC Joyner's with us. Last year, Ryan Kerrigan single-handedly blew the Eagles' entire offense up. Now, in that game, if you remember, I'm sure you do, we talked about it at length. Vaitai was awful in that game, making the start in Washington. We now know Lane Johnson will be there, but Kerrigan played well in both the games last year. The pass rush from Washington really propelled them to 2 victories against the Eagles. Do you think that pass rush will be a factor this time around?
Yeah, but that's why one of the reasons I want to run the ball too. Run the ball, wear those guys down. Run the ball and wear them down and wear them down and wear them down. Because if you're fighting Lane Johnson for 4 quarters and he's running the ball 30, 35 times and he's pushing them off the ball, I think that's going to slow down their pass rush. That's one of the things I'm doing to Washington, saying I'm gonna wear you down. In fact, that's the thing. I mean, as much as I love these passing game matchups, if I'm Philadelphia, again, I'm leaning heavily on running the ball and getting after, just hitting some of those matchups, but wearing those guys down and take that pass rush away. Because, I don't want to see Carson Wentz throwing the ball 35 times in this game. I don't want to see him throwing it 30. Keep him around 25 throws and try and run the ball that often, because I think that would slow things down enough, too, to where you could, you wouldn't have to lean on the passing game quite as much. I don't want to have Wentz throw the ball that often, but, run the ball a lot and wear those guys down.
Yeah, if you're Philadelphia, of their backs, you've got Smallwood, you've got Blunt, and Sproles. Which of those guys are you featuring?
You have to feature Blunt. I think you have to use him as a power back. He scored 18 touchdowns last year, and he's a guy he's a power back who. I've got the metric called good blocking yards per attempt. It measures how productive a back is when you give him good run blocking. If you get into double digits in good blocking yards per attempt and you do it on the 100-plus carries, you're doing very rare territory. Only four running backs did that last year. He's done that in the past, so he has shown breakaway ability in the past. But I think at this point in his career, he is a wear down the defense kind of guy, and I'd bring Smallwood in. I would like to see, if I'm thinking about it and saying I want to split up 30 carries, I want Blunt to get 18-20, and I want the other two guys to split, to get 5 to 7 apiece, because I want to have Sproles get a lot of rushing production. I want to see him be a counterpuncher and make them worry about him. And Smallwood, same way. Smallwood's a guy who has got great short area bursts. So I want to power those guys down and then use the other two as counterpunchers to wear that defense down.
Now, when you saw Gillislee last night in the role that he had in New England, does that make you question Blunt's lifespan at all?
Well, I tell you, again, I do. I had Blunt rated a whole lot higher in fantasy football than most people, and I had him rated as a really good play last night. So he's a guy who's, because that New England offense will lean on their back. So I think that Gillislee is going to be a guy who does really well this year. But do I think that I worry about what they're going to do with versus Gillislee versus Blunt? Gillis is another power back who's also put up a double-digit good blocking yards per attempt. So I just think that they said Gillislee's got a little more tread on a tire. I think New England did, and we want to move him out, and we want to move Blunt out and move him in. I think that's how they viewed the situation. So, but for Philadelphia, all you got to worry about is if Blunt gives you enough tread for the tire for this year. He's not a long-term solution by any stretch of the means, but if you can get 225 carries out of him this year, you'll be fine. So I think they'll be okay. But yeah, it does worry me a little bit. New England said, yeah, we want to move on after the guy scores 18 touchdowns.
All right, KC Joyner, Eagles on the road. They've lost 5 straight against the Redskins. Before we whip around the league real fast, give us your take on who wins this one and why.
Yeah, I put my picks on Twitter and Facebook yesterday, and I've got Philadelphia winning the game. I just think that I think Washington's going to. I think they lost more in their vertical passing game than they realized with Deshaun Jackson. I think they're going to take a big step back there, and I think it's going to impact their whole offense because they had out of this world numbers in vertical yards per attempt last year. I think they're just going to have good numbers, but not nearly as good. And I think Philadelphia, with what they've added on offense, I think they'll have enough firepower to get the win.
All right, let's take a look at some of the other interesting games with KC Joyner real fast. Give us a quick take on the Green Bay-Seattle game. It could be for home field advantage.
Yeah, Seattle, I mentioned that offensive line article I did. Seattle graded out, no matter how I ran the numbers, they graded out as the worst offensive line in the NFL. Green Bay has some problems. They don't run block very well, but they do pass block really well, and I think that they're going to be able to do more because it's at Green Bay. I think Green Bay wins that game, and Seattle's going to have to get that offensive line going if they want to get anywhere this year.
How about this one, Oakland? A lot of people like them. They got to travel to Tennessee. A lot of people like them.
Oakland had the worst good blocking rate allowed on defense last year. They allowed offenses to get more good blocking plays on a percentage basis than anybody else. Tennessee ranked 3rd in good blocking rate last year. Tennessee also pass blocks really well. I think they're going to overpower that Oakland defense. And I think Tennessee's defense, by the way, is much more, I think, a very underrated defense, and I think they're going to give Oakland's offense a problem. So I got Tennessee on that one.
Detroit made the playoffs last year. Arizona was a Super Bowl pick by many last year. They were on the outside looking in. Roles reversed this year?
Yeah, I think that Detroit's going to be. I think Detroit's could get somewhere this year. I can't put them as a Super Bowl contender because I'm never sold on Matthew Stafford as everybody else. Arizona's got to travel to Detroit. I don't know. Arizona never travels well. Detroit's got. I think their offensive line is improved. I think that I think this is going to be a high-scoring game. And as odd as it sounds, I actually like Detroit in that kind of matchup because I think Arizona's got some problems because Palmer forces way too many passes. He had one of the worst bad decision rates of the league last year.
Another interesting game to keep an eye on is, a lot of people like Pittsburgh in the AFC North Division there, but the two teams that could challenge would be Baltimore, Cincinnati. Both of them have disappointed, especially last year. They meet up here. Does Cincinnati get off after a 6-9-1 season? Do they get off on the right foot?
Yeah, I think Cincinnati's going to – I've got Cincinnati big time in that one. Baltimore's already – they're a match. Wow. I think with 12 players they've lost already. I mean, and mind you, offensive linemen, they lost Urschel. They've got big offensive line changes. They're one of the worst-ranked offensive lines. They're in the bottom 5 in the league. They get a D-plus grade this week, and I don't like their matchup against Cincinnati's defense. And Cincinnati's got a much better blocking wall, and I think that they're going to be able to move the ball. Plus, now they've got that three-headed running back duo. They've got Hill, they've got Bernard, and they've got Joe Mixon. I think between those three, they're going to be able to give Baltimore all it wants in the running game.
All right, another game to break down, obviously, is the Sunday nighter. You got New York and Dallas. Dallas going to have Ezekiel Elliott probably for the whole year now, it looks like. Could be no Odell Beckham, though, in the game for the Giants. Giants beat them twice last year. This seems like an annual matchup on opening night.
Yeah, I think Dallas is going to be fired up to get revenge. Plus, if you don't have OBJ, and even if you've got him, even if he does play, I mean, he's 50-50 right now. He's not going to be 100% coming into the game. And I think Dallas is going to be able to have – they've got some weapons in their offense, and I think they're going to be able to go vertical against the Giants more than people think they will. I still think it's going to be a big run-heavy game, but I think they'll be able to hit a couple over-the-top passes. So I got Dallas in a close one, but I think they're going to finally end that losing streak.
All right, KC Joyner, of course, we'll be back on Monday to recap all of the action and the matchups to watch here on the Sports Bash 97.3 ESPN. He'll be checking in with us on Monday at 5:05 with all the reaction from Week 1, those games we just touched on there, and more here on the Sports Bash 97.3 ESPN. KC, welcome back. Welcome back to football.
Thank you. We're riding a storm out down here, too, so keep us in your thoughts there because we got that big hurricane coming.